Judge Humiliates young man, then discovers he's a legal genius. Imagine walking into a room armed with knowledge, preparation, and determination, only to be dismissed before you've spoken a word. For one young man, this wasn't just a bad day. It was the beginning of an ordeal that would challenge everything he believed in. This is the story of a red-haired 21-year-old law prodigy who stepped into a courtroom ready to prove himself, only to face humiliation from a judge who didn't see past his youthful appearance. But what started as a moment of defeat turned into something extraordinary, a story of triumph, resilience, and a shocking twist no one saw coming. Tyler Matthews wasn't like the other kids in his small hometown. While his peers spent their afternoons on the football field or at the mall, Tyler could be found at the local library, his freckled face buried in thick books on philosophy, history, and most importantly, law. His fiery red hair made him a standout in the town, but it was his sharp intellect and unwavering determination that truly set him apart. Growing up in a modest household, Tyler was the youngest of 3 siblings. His father, a mechanic, and his mother, a schoolteacher, worked tirelessly to provide for their family, often sacrificing their own needs to ensure their children had opportunities. Tyler was always keenly aware of their struggles, which instilled in him a deep sense of gratitude and a burning desire to make them proud. By the time he was 12, Tyler had developed an interest in the legal system. It all started with a family friend, Mr. Carter, who had been unfairly evicted from his home. Tyler sat quietly at the kitchen table as Mr. Carter explained his predicament to Tyler's parents, his voice cracking with frustration and helplessness. Tyler didn't understand all the details, but he could see the injustice. "Who helps people like Mr. Carter?" he asked his mother later that night. Her answer was simple: a good lawyer. That conversation lit a fire in Tyler that would never go out. In high school, Tyler's academic prowess became undeniable. Teachers marveled at his ability to grasp complex concepts and his insatiable curiosity about how systems worked. While others dreaded writing essays, Tyler relished the challenge, often going above and beyond what was required. His classmates saw him as the go-to person for debate prep or history projects, but they also teased him about being a future lawyer. Little did they know how accurate that prediction would be. At 17, Tyler enrolled in a college-level pre-law program, juggling his coursework with part-time jobs to help support his family. He thrived in the program, earning accolades from professors who were astounded by his maturity and analytical skills. By the time he graduated from college at 20, he had already passed the bar exam, a feat that left many seasoned professionals in awe. But Tyler's journey wasn't about accolades or recognition. For him, becoming a lawyer was about one thing: helping people like Mr. Carter, people who felt voiceless in the face of powerful systems. Despite his impressive qualifications, Tyler knew he would face challenges in the courtroom. After all, how could anyone take a 21-year-old ginger-haired kid seriously? Tyler's first major case wasn't handed to him on a silver platter. It was a pro bono case that many other lawyers in his firm had passed over, deeming it too small to bother with. But when Tyler read the details, he knew he had to take it. Sarah Jenkins was a single mother of 2, struggling to make ends meet after losing her husband in a car accident the year prior. She had been renting a small apartment in town, but her landlord, a wealthy property mogul named Victor Ellis, had ignored her repeated requests to fix critical issues. The plumbing was faulty, the heating barely worked, and mold was spreading rapidly through the walls. When Sarah's youngest child fell ill, she begged Ellis to do something. Instead, he served her an eviction notice, claiming she was behind on rent, a claim Sarah vehemently denied. When Tyler met Sarah in his small, sparsely furnished office, she was holding a folder of receipts and records, her hands trembling as she tried to explain her situation. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't lose our home. My kids have nowhere else to go." Tyler felt a surge of empathy as he listened to her story. He didn't see her as just a client. He saw her as a person caught in an unjust system, much like Mr. Carter had been years ago. "We're going to fight this," he told her with quiet confidence. "And we're going to win." The case was straightforward in some ways, but daunting in others. Tyler had ample evidence to prove that Ellis had neglected his responsibilities as a landlord. Photos of the apartment showed crumbling walls, water damage, and black mold. Sarah had meticulously kept records of her rent payments, which directly contradicted Ellis's claims. But Tyler knew the odds were stacked against them. Ellis was a powerful man with deep pockets, and he had hired one of the best attorneys in the city to represent him. For Tyler, this wasn't just about the law. It was about proving that he deserved to stand in that courtroom, that he could fight for justice even when the deck was stacked against him. The courtroom was intimidating, with its towering wooden panels, rows of polished benches, and a gallery filled with spectators. Tyler arrived early, dressed in a crisp navy suit that his mother had bought him as a gift after he passed the bar. Despite his nerves, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his head held high as he prepared his opening statement. The judge presiding over the case, Randall Hayes, was a well-respected figure known for his sharp tongue and impatience with what he called nonsense. When Tyler introduced himself as Sarah's counsel, the room fell silent. "You're the attorney?" Judge Hayes asked, raising an eyebrow as he leaned forward. His tone was dripping with skepticism, and a few chuckles erupted from the gallery. "Yes, Your Honor," Tyler replied, his voice steady, but his cheeks flushing. The judge leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slightly. "I hope you brought your school notes, son. This isn't a mock trial." The courtroom erupted in laughter, and Tyler felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. The landlord's attorney, Richard Steele, wasted no time capitalizing on the moment. A seasoned litigator with decades of experience, Steele oozed confidence as he strolled to the podium. "Your Honor," he began with a smirk, "while I appreciate young Mr. Matthews' enthusiasm, I do hope we can keep this proceeding professional." Tyler gritted his teeth but remained composed. He wasn't about to let their condescension derail him. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "my client has the right to a fair hearing, just as Mr. Ellis does. I intend to prove that her eviction was not only unjust, but illegal." The judge waved his hand dismissively. "Let's get on with it," he said. As the trial began, Tyler quickly realized he was in for a fight. Steele interrupted him at every turn, questioning his competence and making sarcastic remarks that drew more laughter from the gallery. Tyler presented photos of Sarah's apartment, detailing the unsafe living conditions, but Steele brushed them off as exaggerated. "Your Honor, I'm sure Mr. Matthews did his best with his high school camera club," Steele said, eliciting another round of chuckles. Through it all, Tyler kept his composure, but the frustration was mounting. He could feel the judge's gaze on him, cold and dismissive, as though he were waiting for Tyler to fail. Despite the hostility, Tyler pressed on, determined to show the court that Sarah's story deserved to be heard. In those early moments, Tyler wasn't just fighting for Sarah. He was fighting for his right to be taken seriously. And though the odds seemed insurmountable, he refused to back down. This was only the beginning of what would become the most pivotal battle of his young career. Tyler Matthews stood at the plaintiff's table, his face calm, but his mind raced as he tried to process the condescending remark from Judge Hayes. The snickers from the courtroom audience didn't help. Tyler's bright red hair seemed to burn brighter under the courtroom lights, making him feel even more like a target. He could hear the whispers from the gallery. Is he even old enough to drive? And, this kid thinks he can win against Victor Ellis. Good luck. Tyler glanced at Sarah Jenkins, sitting beside him with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her nervous energy was palpable, and her eyes pleaded with him to make things right. He gave her a small nod, silently vowing to ignore the doubt and ridicule and focus on what mattered, proving her case. Richard Steele, the landlord's attorney, rose from his seat with an air of practiced arrogance. His expensive suit and confident stride seemed to command the courtroom. He addressed the judge with a smirk. "Your Honor, while I admire Mr. Matthews's determination, I'd like to remind the court that we're here to address facts, not fairy tales." The jab landed like a slap in the room, eliciting soft laughter. Tyler felt the weight of the judge's disapproving gaze, but he stood firm. He refused to let Steele's words shake him. This was his moment to prove he belonged in this courtroom, no matter what anyone thought. Tyler began his opening statement. He spoke clearly and with conviction, laying out the facts of the case: the deplorable conditions of Sarah's apartment, the landlord's repeated negligence, and the fabricated claim that Sarah was behind on rent. Tyler presented photos of the apartment's crumbling walls, mold-infested ceilings, and broken heating system. He pointed to Sarah's rent payment receipts, neatly organized and marked with dates that contradicted the landlord's claims. But every time Tyler gained momentum, Steele interrupted, objecting on the grounds of relevance or speculation. The judge sustained most of the objections, cutting Tyler off mid-sentence. The gallery watched in amusement, waiting for the rookie lawyer to stumble. Tyler clenched his jaw but kept his composure, determined not to give them the satisfaction. As Tyler continued, he caught Judge Hayes rubbing his temples, looking bored. Steele took the opportunity to press his advantage, whispering loudly to his client. "This kid doesn't stand a chance," he said, loud enough for Tyler to hear. The gallery chuckled again, and Tyler could feel his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. But then, something shifted. Tyler's first real breakthrough came during Sarah's testimony. She took the stand, her voice trembling as she described the conditions in her apartment. "The heater hasn't worked in months," she said, her hands gripping the edge of the stand. "Last winter, we had to sleep in our coats because it was so cold, and my youngest son got sick from the mold. I begged Mr. Ellis to fix it, but he never did." Sarah's words hung in the air, and for the first time, the courtroom grew quiet. Steele shifted in his seat, glancing at Judge Hayes, who seemed to be paying closer attention. Tyler seized the moment. "Ms. Jenkins," Tyler said, his voice calm but firm, "did you document your communication with Mr. Ellis regarding these issues?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice steadying. She reached for a folder and pulled out a stack of emails and text messages, each one detailing her repeated pleas for repairs and the landlord's dismissive responses. Tyler presented them to the court, walking through each message with precision. Steele quickly objected, claiming the evidence was inadmissible, but this time Judge Hayes waved him off. "Let's hear it," the judge said, surprising everyone. Tyler continued, carefully laying out a timeline that showed not only the landlord's negligence, but also his clear intent to ignore Sarah's rights as a tenant. He introduced testimonies from Sarah's neighbors, who corroborated her claims about the apartment's dangerous conditions. The tide in the courtroom began to shift. The gallery grew quieter, their expressions changing from amusement to intrigue. Even Steele's confident smirk began to waver. Steele, however, wasn't ready to back down. He launched a counterattack, questioning Sarah's credibility and suggesting that her financial struggles were the real reason for her eviction. "Ms. Jenkins," he said with a sneer, "isn't it true that you've fallen behind on other bills in the past? How can we be sure you didn't do the same with your rent?" Sarah hesitated, clearly rattled, and Tyler stepped in. "Objection, Your Honor," he said firmly. "Counsel is attempting to discredit my client without evidence." Judge Hayes nodded. Sustained. Stick to the facts, Mr. Steele. Tyler felt a surge of confidence. The judge, while still skeptical, seemed to be giving him a fairer shake. He knew he had to capitalize on the moment. He introduced a key piece of evidence, a maintenance worker who had previously worked for Victor Ellis. The man testified that Ellis routinely ignored tenant complaints, prioritizing profit over safety. He'd say things like, "If they don't like it, they can leave," the worker said. He didn't care about fixing anything unless it cost him money. Steele objected, but the damage was done. The testimony painted a damning picture of Ellis's behavior and gave Tyler the momentum he needed. For the first time, Judge Hayes leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Tyler could feel the room shifting in his favor. He pressed on, presenting evidence that Ellis had deliberately falsified documents to justify Sarah's eviction. "Your Honor," Tyler said, his voice steady and commanding, "this isn't just a case about negligence. It's about accountability. My client followed the rules. She paid her rent, she reported the issues, and she was ignored. She deserves justice." The gallery sat in stunned silence. Even Steele seemed at a loss for words. Judge Hayes glanced at Tyler, his expression unreadable, but there was no denying that the young attorney had captured the room's attention. By the end of the day, Tyler had not only fought back against the judge's initial scorn, but had begun to prove himself as a formidable advocate. The gallery murmured with excitement as court adjourned, and Sarah whispered, "Thank you." Her eyes filled with gratitude. Tyler smiled, his resolve stronger than ever. He wasn't just fighting for Sarah. He was fighting to prove that justice didn't have an age limit. The battle was far from over, but he knew one thing. He belonged in that courtroom. The courtroom was quieter now, but the tension was palpable. Tyler stood at the plaintiff's table, carefully reviewing his notes. The weight of the case bore down on him, but he couldn't let it show. Across the room, Richard Steele conferred with his client, their expressions a mix of frustration and disbelief. Tyler had managed to introduce enough compelling evidence to shake their confidence, but he knew they weren't done fighting. The next witness was critical. It was Sarah's neighbor, Mrs. Green, an elderly woman who had lived in the same apartment complex for over 2 decades. She hobbled to the stand with the aid of a cane, her frail figure dwarfed by the large wooden seat. Despite her age, there was a fire in her eyes that Tyler immediately recognized. She wanted to help. "Mrs. Green," Tyler began, his voice steady, "can you tell the court about the conditions in your apartment building?" Mrs. Green adjusted her glasses, leaning slightly forward. "It's terrible," she said plainly. "The pipes leak, the ceilings are stained with water damage, and the heat barely works in the winter. I've filed complaints myself, but nothing ever gets fixed. Victor Ellis doesn't care about us. He only cares about collecting rent." Steele jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is speculative and irrelevant." Judge Hayes, who had been leaning back in his chair, straightened up. "Overruled," he said, surprising everyone. "I'd like to hear more about this." Tyler nodded his thanks to the judge and continued. "Mrs. Green, have you ever spoken directly to Mr. Ellis about these issues?" "Yes," she replied. "I've called him, written letters, even went to his office once. He always makes excuses, says he'll take care of it, but he never does. It's been like this for years." Tyler could feel the jury's eyes on Mrs. Green, their expressions softening as she spoke. Her testimony wasn't just evidence, it was a human story, one that highlighted the broader pattern of neglect in the building. Steele tried to discredit her. "Mrs. Green, isn't it true that you've had conflicts with Mr. Ellis in the past? Perhaps some personal grievances that might influence your testimony?" Mrs. Green didn't flinch. "The only grievance I have is living in a building that's falling apart while Mr. Ellis counts his money. If you think I'm lying, you can come see the mold in my bathroom for yourself." The gallery chuckled softly, and even Judge Hayes couldn't hide a faint smirk. Steele sat back down, clearly irritated. As Mrs. Green stepped down, Tyler caught her eye and gave her a grateful nod. She smiled in return, the kind of smile that said, "Don't give up." The day wasn't over yet, and Tyler knew he needed to keep the momentum going. He turned his attention to the landlord himself, Victor Ellis, who was set to take the stand. Ellis looked calm, even smug as he approached, clearly believing he could talk his way out of any accusations. Tyler started cautiously, asking basic questions about Ellis's role as a landlord and his responsibilities. Ellis answered smoothly, presenting himself as a reasonable businessman who cared deeply about his tenants. But Tyler had done his homework. He pulled out a series of maintenance requests filed by multiple tenants over the years, each one stamped with dates and marked unresolved. He presented them to Ellis. "Mr. Ellis, can you explain why these requests were never addressed?" Ellis hesitated for the first time, his confident demeanor faltering slightly. "I can't recall," he said vaguely. "There must have been some misunderstanding." Tyler pressed on. "A misunderstanding? These are documented complaints from your tenants. Are you saying you were unaware of these issues?" Ellis shifted uncomfortably. "I delegate those responsibilities to my staff. If something wasn't addressed, it's because they failed to inform me." Tyler didn't let up. "So you're saying that your staff is to blame for the unsafe conditions in your building, that as the property owner, you bear no responsibility?" Ellis's lawyer objected, but Judge Hayes allowed Tyler to continue. The tension in the room was palpable as Ellis struggled to maintain his composure. Tyler then presented a damning piece of evidence, an email exchange between Ellis and his property manager. In the emails, Ellis explicitly instructed the manager not to spend money on repairs unless legally required, citing unnecessary expenses. The courtroom gasped, and Steele leapt to his feet. "Objection! This evidence was not disclosed during discovery." Tyler remained calm. "Your Honor, this email was obtained through proper channels and is directly relevant to the case. It shows a clear pattern of negligence and intentional disregard for tenant safety." Judge Hayes examined the documents carefully before nodding. "Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Matthews." Ellis's face turned red as Tyler read excerpts from the emails aloud. The jury watched intently, their expressions hardening. Tyler's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a quiet determination that made it clear he wouldn't back down. "Mr. Ellis," Tyler said, "you claim to care about your tenants, yet these emails show the opposite. How do you explain this?" Ellis stammered, his earlier confidence completely eroded. I didn't mean for it to come across that way. It's been taken out of context." Tyler didn't let him off the hook. "Out of context? These are your words, Mr. Ellis. Words that show a blatant disregard for the people who trusted you to provide a safe place to live." The gallery was silent, the weight of Tyler's words hanging in the air. Even Judge Hayes seemed impressed, his earlier skepticism replaced by a newfound respect. When court adjourned for the day, Tyler felt a surge of relief and pride. He had stood his ground, facing down not only a seasoned attorney, but also a biased judge and a powerful landlord. As he packed up his notes, Sarah approached him, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she said quietly. "No matter what happens, thank you for fighting for me and my kids." Tyler smiled, his voice soft but firm. "We're not done yet, Sarah. We're going to win this." As he left the courtroom, Tyler couldn't help but feel a growing sense of determination. This case wasn't just about Sarah, It was about proving that justice could prevail, even against the odds. He was no longer the nervous young attorney trying to prove himself. He was a fighter, and he wasn't going to stop until the truth came out. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Tyler Matthews was ready for the final round. He had spent countless hours poring over evidence, prepping his client, and anticipating every move Richard Steele might make. The landlord's smug demeanor had cracked under the pressure, but Tyler knew Steele wouldn't go down without a fight. There was still one weapon left in Steele's arsenal, and Tyler could feel it looming. As court resumed the next morning, Steele wasted no time springing his trap. "Your Honor," he began with a confident smirk, "we have one final piece of evidence to introduce." The gallery leaned forward, curious, as Steele presented a series of documents, bank statements that allegedly showed Sarah Jenkins had missed several rent payments. The timing was too perfect. These records hadn't been disclosed earlier, and Tyler immediately suspected they had been doctored. But Steele was already weaving a narrative, painting Sarah as an unreliable tenant who had brought the eviction on herself. "This evidence clearly shows that my client had every right to evict Ms. Jenkins," Steele said, his voice oozing confidence. "Despite her claims, she repeatedly failed to pay her rent on time." Sarah's face went pale, her hands trembling as she whispered to Tyler, "That's not true. I have proof I paid." Tyler placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before standing. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence was not disclosed during discovery. It's highly irregular to introduce it at this stage." Judge Hayes looked at Steele with a frown. "Mr. Steele, care to explain?" Steele shrugged, feigning innocence. "The documents only recently came to our attention, Your Honor. We're simply ensuring the court has all the facts." The judge hesitated, then sighed. "I'll allow it, but I expect a full explanation later." He turned to Tyler. "Mr. Matthews, you may cross-examine." Tyler's mind raced. This was a clear attempt to discredit Sarah at the last moment, and the judge's decision to admit the evidence left him little room to maneuver. But he wasn't about to let Steele's underhanded tactics derail the case. Tyler approached the bench, taking the documents in hand. He studied them carefully, noting subtle discrepancies in the formatting and the dates. Something was off. He needed time to expose the truth. But first, he had to keep the jury on his side. "Mr. Ellis," Tyler began, addressing the landlord directly, "can you confirm that these statements are an accurate reflection of my client's payment history?" Ellis hesitated, glancing nervously at Steele before answering. "Yes, as far as I know." Tyler pressed him. "You're the property owner, correct? Shouldn't you know for certain whether or not these statements are accurate?" Ellis faltered, his earlier confidence nowhere to be found. "Well, I rely on my accounting team for these things." "And is it possible," Tyler continued, his voice calm but insistent, "that these records were manipulated to support your case?" Steele jumped to his feet. "Objection! Counsel is making baseless accusations." Tyler turned to the judge, his expression resolute. "Your Honor, I request permission to subpoena the original records from the bank. If these statements are genuine, there should be no issue verifying them." The judge considered this for a moment before nodding. "Granted. We'll reconvene once the records have been reviewed." Steele's confident smirk finally faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. Tyler knew he had bought himself some time, but now he needed to act fast. During the recess, he worked tirelessly with Sarah to gather her original payment receipts and bank records. They combed through every detail, searching for the smoking gun that would prove her innocence. When court resumed, Tyler was ready. He stood before the jury, holding up Sarah's original bank statements alongside the records Steele had introduced. "Ladies and gentlemen, he began. "What you see here are two sets of documents. One is genuine, and the other has been altered to paint my client as a delinquent tenant. Let me show you the differences." Using a projector, Tyler highlighted inconsistencies in the formatting, including mismatched fonts and alignment issues. He pointed out transactions that appeared on one set of records but not the other, and he demonstrated how the falsified statements didn't match the timeline of Sarah's receipts. The jury watched intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to outrage. Even Judge Hayes leaned forward, his skepticism replaced by genuine interest. "Your Honor," Tyler concluded, "this attempt to discredit my client is not only unethical, it's illegal. These falsified documents are a desperate ploy to justify an eviction that should never have happened." Steele scrambled to recover, but the damage was done. The jury's trust in the defense had been shattered, and Ellis's credibility was in tatters. When Tyler rested his case, the courtroom was silent. The gallery, which had once dismissed him as a boy playing lawyer, now looked at him with newfound respect. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears as she whispered, "Thank you." The jury deliberated for hours, and when they returned, the air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Tyler's heart pounded as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Sarah Jenkins," the foreperson announced. "We recommend full reparations for damages and immediate dismissal of the eviction." The gallery erupted in murmurs, and Sarah broke down in relief. Tyler felt a wave of pride and gratitude wash over him. He had done it, not just for Sarah, but for himself, proving that justice could prevail even in the face of overwhelming doubt. Judge Hayes addressed Tyler directly. "Mr. Matthews," he said, his tone more respectful than it had been all trial, "you've earned my respect today. Well done." As Tyler packed up his notes, he glanced around the courtroom, taking in the expressions of awe and admiration. This was just the beginning of his journey, but it was a victory he would never forget. And for the first time, he truly believed he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the courtroom emptied after the verdict, Tyler Matthews stayed behind for a moment, gathering his things and letting the weight of the moment sink in. The gallery was buzzing as spectators whispered about the young attorney who had just pulled off an incredible victory. Many had doubted him when the trial began, but now there was no denying that he had earned his place in the courtroom. Sarah Jenkins approached Tyler, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief. Her hands trembled as she reached out to shake his. "You didn't just save my home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave my kids and me hope again. I'll never be able to thank you enough." Tyler smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. You deserved this. The truth was always on your side. We just had to fight to make people see it." As Sarah left to reunite with her children, Tyler noticed Judge Hayes lingering at his bench. The judge motioned for Tyler to approach. Tyler, unsure of what to expect, walked over with a mix of pride and caution. "Mr. Matthews," the judge began, his tone softer than it had been throughout the trial, "I'll admit I misjudged you. When you first walked into this courtroom, I didn't think you'd last a day. But you proved me wrong. Your preparation, your poise, and your commitment to justice were impressive." Tyler's heart swelled at the unexpected praise. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said. "That means a lot coming from you." Judge Hayes leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "You have a bright future ahead of you, but don't let this victory make you complacent. Every case will test you in new ways. Stay humble, stay prepared, and never lose sight of why you chose this path." Tyler nodded, taking the words to heart. "I won't forget that, Your Honor." As he left the courtroom, Tyler felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The weight of the trial had taken a toll, but the outcome made it all worthwhile. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors, local reporters, and supporters who had followed the case closely. Cameras flashed, and a few people clapped as Tyler stepped into the sunlight. A reporter approached him with a microphone. "Mr. Matthews, how does it feel to win your first major case at such a young age?" Tyler hesitated for a moment, then answered thoughtfully. "It's not about me. It's about the people I represent. Sarah Jenkins deserved justice, and I'm grateful I could help her get it. That's why I became a lawyer." The reporter pressed further. "What's next for you? Do you have plans to take on more cases like this?" Tyler smiled. "Absolutely. There are so many people out there who feel like they don't have a voice. If I can be that voice for them, then I'm doing what I set out to do." As the crowd dispersed, Tyler felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Mrs. Green, the elderly neighbor who had testified during the trial. "You're going to do great things, young man," she said with a proud smile. "Don't ever let them underestimate you again." Her words stuck with Tyler as he made his way back to his small office. That night, he sat at his desk, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The late nights studying, the skepticism he faced from peers and professionals, and the unwavering belief in the power of the truth. He thought about his parents, who had worked so hard to support his dreams, and about Mr. Carter, whose story had inspired him all those years ago. Tyler's phone buzzed with messages of congratulations from friends and colleagues. But one message stood out. It was from a law professor who had doubted Tyler's decision to pursue such an ambitious case so early in his career. The message was simple: "You proved me wrong. Well done." The next morning, Tyler returned to the office to find Sarah and her 2 children waiting for him. The kids handed him a handmade card that read, "Thank you for saving our home." Tyler knelt down to their level, smiling as he accepted the card. "You're welcome," he said. "But remember, your mum is the real hero here. She fought just as hard as I did." After they left, Tyler opened his calendar and saw a long list of new inquiries from potential clients. News of his victory had spread, and people were eager to seek his help. Tyler knew he couldn't take every case, but he was determined to prioritize those who needed him the most, the ones who felt unheard and overlooked. That week, Tyler received an invitation to speak at a local high school's career day. Standing in front of a room full of curious students, he shared his journey, from a small-town kid with big dreams to a lawyer fighting for justice. He emphasized the importance of perseverance, humility, and believing in yourself, even when others don't. One student raised their hand and asked, "What do you do when people don't take you seriously because you're young?" Tyler thought for a moment before answering. "You let your work speak for itself. People might doubt you at first, but if you're prepared, if you know your stuff, and if you stay focused on what's right, you can prove them wrong. And when you do, their opinions won't matter anymore." The room erupted into applause, and Tyler felt a surge of pride. He wasn't just building a career, he was inspiring others to chase their own dreams. Later that evening, as Tyler sat in his office reviewing new case files, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Winning the case for Sarah had been a milestone, but it was just the beginning. He knew there would be bigger challenges ahead, tougher battles to fight, and more people who needed his help. And he was ready for all of it. For Tyler Matthews, the road to justice wasn't just a path, it was a calling. And he intended to answer it every single day. As Tyler sat at his desk, the room illuminated only by the soft glow of his desk lamp, he leaned back in his chair and reflected on everything that had transpired. The courtroom battles, the doubt, the triumph, it all seemed surreal. But it wasn't just the victory that stayed with him. It was the people. Sarah Jenkins, Mrs. Green, Judge Hayes, the jury, and even those who had doubted him. Each person had played a part in shaping the outcome and in shaping him. He opened the handmade card Sarah's children had given him earlier. Their simple message, "Thank you for saving our home," carried a weight that no accolade or headline ever could. It was a reminder of why he started this journey in the first place, to make a difference for people who felt powerless, to give them hope when they felt all was lost. But it wasn't just about Sarah. Tyler thought about the broader impact of the case. It wasn't just one woman's fight against an unjust system. It was a story of resilience and the importance of standing up for what's right, no matter how daunting the challenge might seem. It was proof that one voice, one effort, could spark change, even in the face of overwhelming odds. He picked up his pen and wrote a note to himself on a sticky pad. "Never forget why you started. Keep fighting for them." He stuck it to the edge of his computer monitor, a small but powerful reminder to stay grounded in his mission. The next day, Tyler attended a community event held in Sarah's honor. Families gathered in a local park, enjoying food and music. But the event wasn't just a celebration, it was a call to action. Speakers talked about the need for tenant rights, for holding landlords accountable, and for building stronger, more supportive communities. Tyler was asked to say a few words, and as he stepped up to the microphone, he felt the weight of everyone's attention. He began quietly, his voice steady. "When I first met Sarah, I saw a woman who wasn't asking for much. Just fairness, just a chance to give her kids a safe place to call home. What struck me most wasn't the injustice she faced, but her courage to fight back against it. She didn't let fear stop her, and she inspired me to do the same." He paused, looking out at the crowd. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just about Sarah's case. It was about proving that justice is possible, even when it feels out of reach. But it's not something any one person can achieve alone. It takes all of us, standing together, supporting one another, and refusing to let anyone's voice go unheard. His tone grew more personal. "I know many of you have faced challenges like Sarah's. Maybe you've been overlooked, dismissed, or felt like you didn't matter. I want you to know, you matter. Your story matters. And when we stand up for what's right, no matter how small the step might seem, we create ripples that grow into waves of change." The crowd erupted into applause, but Tyler wasn't finished. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice quieter now, almost conversational. "I also want to say something to those of you watching this later or hearing about it. Maybe you're not sure if you can make a difference. Maybe you think the problems in your life or in the world are too big. I'm here to tell you, they're not. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to do it alone. Just take that first step, no matter how small, and believe that your effort matters." As he stepped down, people approached him, sharing their own stories of struggles and triumphs. A man in his 60s thanked him for inspiring his granddaughter, who had recently decided to pursue a career in law. A young mother expressed how his words gave her the courage to confront her own landlord about unsafe conditions. Tyler listened to each person, feeling both humbled and motivated. That night, as he drove home, Tyler couldn't help but think about the journey ahead. There would be more battles, more challenges, and more moments of doubt. But there would also be victories, big and small, that made every struggle worthwhile. He thought about his younger self, the kid with ginger hair and big dreams, and how proud that boy would be of the man he was becoming. Back at his office, Tyler recorded a short video message for his followers and supporters. "If you've been following this story, I want to thank you, not just for your interest, but for caring about justice. This isn't about me, it's about all of us working together to make things better. If Sarah's story moved you, I invite you to share it, to comment, and to be part of this conversation. Because real change starts when we come together and refuse to accept the status quo." Let's keep fighting for what's right." He uploaded the video and watched as the comments poured in. People shared their own stories of resilience, thanked Tyler for his work, and pledged to support similar causes. One comment stood out. "This story gives me hope. Thank you for reminding us that we can make a difference." As Tyler leaned back in his chair, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time, he truly believed that they were on the right path, and he knew he wasn't walking it alone.